Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to the Elevate Business podcast. Both myself, Ange MacCabe, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to Jay Goldman, the co-founder and the CEO of Sensei Labs and a New York Times bestselling author of The Decoded Company. For nearly 20 years, he has been focused on technology, design, and the art of leadership. Sensei Labs is Jay's second tech startup success and regularly speaks with teams and companies across the globe about the future of work, including at TEDx, NASA, Harvard Business School, Google, and Twitter's world headquarters. Now he spends his days helping the largest enterprises in the world execute their most critical programs through the enterprise orchestration, alongside his amazing crew of more than 80 Sensei at Sensei Labs. Warm welcome, Jay. Glad to have you here. We're excited to chat with you, Jay, today and learn more about your journey when it comes to leadership, as well as your company.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Awesome. So tell us all about your leadership journey and how that's gotten to you where you are at today.
Yeah, I think it's always an interesting question because it looks always in hindsight like it was intentional and it never actually is. And so if I went back 5 years and thought, where am I going to be 5 years from now? I don't think I could have predicted that it would be where I am. Mm-hmm. And I'm always, whenever asked for sort of advice about career planning, the best thing that I can say is be curious about things and be open to possibilities, because the path that you take won't end up looking much like you think that it's going to. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's very much been the case for me to get to where I am today. It's my honor to be the co-founder and CEO of Sensei Labs and to have spun that out of a parent company called Click Health, where I had the privilege of being part of the senior leadership team at Click, and to have the opportunity to take a technology that we had built internally and commercialize it into market as a new offering and a new team that we built around that was a great opportunity to go from helping to lead a much larger organization to getting to start and lead a much smaller one. Today, we are about 85 people on the Sensei Lab side. Click is about 1,700 people. So it's grown to a lot larger than Sensei Labs is. And I had the opportunity to be at Click in the Click family now about 11 years total. And so I was there for a few years before we started down our Sensei journey. It really came out of our book that we wrote, The Decoded Company, which came out in 2014. And Decoded was really a bit of an experiment for us. Everything about the Click culture and about the Sensei culture is around experimentation. And so we thought it might be a good time to write, to write a book and to tell a little bit about the story of how we ran Click at the time. Certainly, much of it remains true today. It's evolved a bit since then, but how we ran it at the time and how we used technology and data to build a talent-centric workplace that really engaged people passionately in what we do at Click and what we do today at Sensei. And we wrote it because we were getting asked a lot about how we were able to achieve the success that Click enjoys, 30 to 40% year-over-year growth annually since it was founded in 1997. And obviously that gets harder mathematically as the numbers get bigger. And so we would get asked regularly, well, it's great that you were able to do it last year, but you're probably not going to be able to do it next year. And then we would do it again. And then people would say, wow, how did you do that? We thought, okay, let's write the story about how we do that. But also, let's write a book that's going to inspire people to want to work here. And so they will hopefully read the book and then come and apply to work at Click. And certainly that did happen a little bit. There were definitely some people who read Decoded and then came to work at Click. But really the unexpected thing that happened is it became a New York Times bestseller. I think we were just at the right place at the right time. We wrote a book about big data and about using big data to build talent-centric workplaces at exactly the moment where both big data and sort of talent-centric or culture-centric workplaces became really hot topics.
Right.
And so that gave us the opportunity to speak all over the world. We got to go on a book tour and speak at places like NASA and TED and Harvard Business School and Twitter's headquarters. Google had us out to a bunch of their offices around the world. And everywhere that we went on that speaking tour, there was a lineup of people who wanted to know where they could buy the software that we had described in the book. And the answer was you can't. It's a proprietary system that we built for ourselves. But we're entrepreneurs at heart. It didn't take long for us to say, hang on, maybe there is some unmet market need here that we should be figuring out how to serve. And so that was really where we started. And that was 2015 when we signed our first customer up to use the platform. And it's been that journey ever since then.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Talk about having an audience ready for your product before even having the product built or anything else, right?
Right. I mean, I would love to say in hindsight, that was our plan all along. That was just lucky coincidence.
Yeah, it's anecdotal at this point for sure. There's a lot to unpack there, Jay, in the sense of, understanding leadership styles and what's needed as a leader by way of skill sets, going from a larger company to a smaller kind of, I guess, a scrappy startup atmosphere. Then the other thing that I was hearing there that I'm excited to unpack is that engagement piece. So not to create a spoiler alert if anybody hasn't read your book, but as you see things and environments changing, what are the top things for you that really have kind of stuck to allow teams to engage and stay engaged?
A big part of what we've always found in Click and at Sensei is growth and abundance of opportunity engages people. And so really at a sort of personal level, if the business is growing and there's a wealth of opportunity, it represents personal opportunity as much as it does opportunity for the business. And if you've built an environment and a culture in which people are celebrated for their success and have the opportunity to grow alongside the business, then that growth is representative of their personal career path, not just financial growth, although that's often part of it as well, but that they are challenged and that they have an opportunity to keep learning and to keep growing. I'm pretty sure this is in the book. It's been a while since I read our own book, so I don't remember exactly what's in it or not, but I'm pretty sure this is in the book. We talk a lot internally about something that we call weekly compounded learning rate. And so it's the idea that if I learn something in week 1, what I'm learning in week 2 builds on what I learned in week 1. Yes. And so it compounds in the same way that interest compounds. And if the weekly compounded learning rate is high, then I am engaged in what I'm doing. There's always new challenge. There's always something new to learn. And I'm building on skills that I've already built. So I get closer to mastery over time because I get better and better.
Right.
But at some point in a particular path, I also kind of reach a limit. I've mastered the thing. And so a culture that takes care of its people in that regard will look for new opportunities to challenge them. That might look like a lateral move rather than a move up. It might look like taking on a new line of business. In some cases, it might be someone comes to you within the organization with an idea to start something and you give them the opportunity to try that out internally, which is exactly what happened for me in my journey at Click when it came to Sensei Labs. And so I think that's part of how that individual role changes as the company changes, as the scale changes. I joined Click in 2010. It was 130 people. So that growth from then to 1,700 people now represents a huge amount of change and opportunity for the people involved.
100%. And what continues to come up, or the circular thought that was coming up for me, Jay, was how is it approached? So as a company grows, skill sets need to grow. Engagement also ought to grow with it. How does that take place? Because oftentimes what we see with a lot of our clients is that they don't know what they don't know. And, operations takes precedence 9 times out of 10 as to how do we get this thing done? Or how do we get to B funding? Or how do we get to our launch? Or how do we get to our pilots? And the people side of things in some circumstances can take a back seat. So how do you make sure that it's at the forefront to be like, hey, Ange, I see that you've been with us for a couple of years now. Like, what type of growth path do you want? And kind of entertaining those types of conversations.
Yeah, some of the growth that a business experiences is in a way more stable growth. So if you think about Click as an example, and obviously a huge amount of growth, but Click's core offering hasn't, in a lot of ways, hasn't changed. They are a commercialization partner to life science companies, biotechs and pharma companies. Right. And although the specifics of that offering change as marketing evolves and new channels appear and that kind of thing, the fundamental model of professional services and marketing hasn't changed all that much. Right. The growth opportunity in a business like that is expansion. So we're taking on new clients, or in the case of life science, it might be a new disease state we've never worked in before, or something like that, or changing some of the offerings. So it might be we're currently doing commercialization of marketing and we want to move into pre-commercial situations or something along those lines. So the growth opportunities that come up there are a little bit different than they are in a startup environment like Sensei, where we are still figuring out a lot of this stuff. And so to your point, Ange, about something like getting ready for a Series B, which is the state that we're in. We raised our Series A at the end of 2020. And so we're in between funding rounds right now. But the set of challenges that we need to resolve to get ourselves into a place where we're ready to raise that Series B are different. And in a lot of cases, things that we haven't done before. So now it's more of a learning opportunity where it's giving somebody a challenge to say, I don't actually know the answer to this, but I want you to go and figure it out, rather than, hey, we've done this successfully before. So can you repeat this in a new space? Those are different kinds of challenges. And some people react better to one or better to the other. Right. For people who thrive in ambiguity, the startup environment is better. They like the figuring out of things for the first time. For people who don't like ambiguity as much, they are happy executing a successful playbook. Then that larger scale of organization, or the more sort of stable offering, is probably a better fit for them in terms of the kind of growth that's going to be appealing.
You bring up a good point, Jay, about different people's working styles or behavioral styles and how they align with the organization's growth. And it's almost like you need a different skill set to be able to work well in the ambiguity. And as you grow, maybe you're in Click's position where, while you do have a playbook that's successful, those people might get bored in that kind of situation. And so how do you help better identify what people's passions are and what they're looking for, even at times when they don't even know themselves?
It's a good question about the part where they don't know themselves, because it is a very important piece at a sort of very micro example level of that. We have a tool that we use, which I've seen various different versions of this floating around out there. We kind of took various ones and built our own out of it, but we call it the mood grid. And we use it at the beginning of meetings, particularly if it's sort of a team meeting, stand up, that kind of thing. And it's a quick check-in to go around the table. How are you feeling? Just as we come into this meeting. And what we learned is, if you just ask that as an open-ended question, you tend to get pretty much the same answer from everyone. Yeah, I feel pretty good, or, fine, or whatever. People don't have at their immediate grasp the vocabulary to describe something like that. And so the mood grid is a tool that we bring up on screen. We have a version of it that we built for our own internal use. That's actually a little mini web app. And so we can bring it up in a meeting, and then we can go around, and the mood grid's divided into 4 quadrants. And they're sort of higher energy emotions above the fold and lower below, and then sort of positive to the right and a bit more negative to the left. So if you're angry, you're probably up in the negative, higher energy category. And if you're just super chill and happy, you're probably down in the right quadrant. And we'll just go around the table and do a quick check-in. How are you feeling? Each one of the squares in there has a different emotion on it. And it really helps people narrow down where they are in that. So what I might have just said, like, yeah, I feel good. But now I'm looking at this and like, do I feel happy or do I feel excited? Those aren't quite the same thing. And so you can kind of find where you are. And the version that we have, you can just click on them and sort of mark them. And then you get a sense of how the whole group is feeling, because you can see which squares got marked as you kind of go around. And so we just recently had a senior leadership team bi-weekly meeting, as we do. And as we went around the table, there was a strong wave of optimism. We've just got a bunch of awesome things happening. And so in our version, as you hit a certain number of people that pick the same one, it gets a little fire icon, and then it gets 2 fire icons and 3 fire icons. And it's really inspiring to see everybody on the team is feeling really optimistic about some changes that we've made and a direction that we're taking. That's a great check-in tool. I say that's at a very micro level, because to come back to your question, Scott, I think it's the same problem at a career growth level. It's just a bigger one, right? I don't know how to describe the thing that I want. I'm not sure what that path is. And so part of the way that we get there, there's a few tools. I'd say one is we absolutely, this probably isn't a big surprise, but we absolutely do not believe in annual reviews. It is a completely pointless exercise. It does not achieve anything that it's supposed to achieve except take up a huge amount of time for the organization. And so we long ago got rid of any of that kind of annual review from a performance and a feedback perspective. All of our feedback is around coaching, and it's in weekly or biweekly one-on-ones, just depends on the team. And so part of that is helping you on a regular basis to get feedback. In Decoded, we talk about something that we call the rule of 5 degrees, which is really simple. If you're on a boat and you leave your side of the lake and you set a course to get to a place on the other side of the lake, if you're 5 degrees off course, when you leave your side, it's a very easy course correction. But if you get all the way to the other side of the lake and you're still 5 degrees off course, you could be kilometers away or miles away from where you expected to end up. And so course correct early, because if you course correct early, it's a very small adjustment. But if you wait till later, it's much bigger. If you do biweekly or weekly coaching sessions and you give people feedback in those sessions, they can course correct that 5 degrees very quickly. So that's partly about helping them get to the objective. But it also gives you regular check-in opportunities to do some of the coaching around thinking about career paths, thinking about where you want to go. We get a fair amount of lateral movement within our, both Click and Sensei, in terms of people who are saying, yeah, you know what, I might want to try some of this role and get a sense for it. Great. Let's find a lightweight way for you to take on some of that and just experiment with it and see if it's something that you might like. Much less career ladder and more sort of career map in terms of where you might find yourself in your next role. And that helps people try things on a bit and see if it's something that does feel like it might be a fit for them. The other thing is we, and this is a very Sensei specific thing rather than Click, but we took our time articulating our core values as a business. We really wanted it to be something that was very memorable and easy for people to come back to. So we actually built it into the word Sensei. And so for us, our core values as a business are being selfless, empathetic, nimble, skilled, entrepreneurial, and having integrity. And so that spells out the word Sensei. It's very easy for people to remember. Sometimes it's hard to remember which S and which E goes in the right order. Aside from that, it's easy enough to remember. And then we didn't want this to just be, posters up on the wall in the break room, which is so often where these corporate value exercises go to. So we've actually structured our entire culture as a business around those core values. And that goes to things like if you are interviewing a candidate, you might be asked to focus on one of those values. And in the interview, you will be given a guide with a bunch of questions and good or bad answers to expect around those cultural values. In your post-interview survey, the format of that in our applicant tracking system is around those values and the things that we would like to see exhibited from them. When you get to career planning, we have, it's actually for ease, it's just a giant Excel spreadsheet, but we have a spreadsheet that has the values in rows and every role in the organization in columns. Everyone in the company has access to it. And in the intersection of each are observable behaviors we would expect to see. What does selfless look like for software engineer 1 versus a software engineer 2, or for a sales development manager versus an account executive? And by looking at that, you can see both where am I today, but also if I wanted to do this job in the future, what would those observable behaviors look like? And can I relate to that and say, yes, I'd like to get there? Or actually, now that I look at this, it's maybe not something I want. So where else in here do I feel a stronger sense of identity with that set of behaviors?
Definitely. Honestly, I don't know whether it's firecrackers or party in my mind, but there's so much to dive into there, Jay, for sure. Like backing it up a little bit, I'm curious to understand where oftentimes I would say you lean into data when it comes to the mood board. And I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, but when it comes to the mood board, have you tracked the data as to trends and how that works? And that's kind of my first question, but then I'm going to keep rolling from there. But I just want to pause there just for a second.
Yeah. So we have, we always weigh when we're looking at these things, the big brother creepiness factor versus the data factor, right?
Fair. Okay.
Sometimes you make a decision, you're like, it would be really nice to know that, but it's also super creepy. So we're not going to do that. And actually, there's a whole section of Decoded that talks about this. And one of the ways to get around that we found quite effective in where you choose to use data in an organization is, first of all, never use it for evil purposes.
No.
Which is maybe obvious to say, but but that's a good guiding principle. But the other thing is, you should always have full parity of access to that data. If I know something about you, you should be able to know the same thing about me. The only exception that we draw to that is compensation data for obvious reasons. But aside from that, for example, if we were to make mood grid data available, we would make it available to everybody on the team, and then everyone has access to the same set of information.
Right.
It takes away some of the places where that data might be used against you rather than in support of you achieving a better goal.
I love that. Where I was going with that, just to interrupt you, was from a performance side of things, not performance in the sense of team member, are you doing a good job? But when you're looking at your whole organization and things are taking place, A funding versus B funding, great things are happening within the organization versus, in some circumstances, we have to use our resiliency or grit muscles. So being able to look at that type of data from that lens with your team is how it's from an organizational behavioral model perspective. How are we impacting them by the moves that we're making as an organization and taking collective data and opinions so that we have subjective and objective information as to, okay, how can we better set up our team members, or how can we better communicate as an organization, or things like, how can we better impact people in general, honoring all of your core values through Sensei. Yeah. That's kind of where my mind was going out of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So we look at the mood grid data in aggregate, but we don't identify when someone is completing it, who they are. And so I couldn't tell you which team on Thursday at 3 p.m. filled in the mood grid, but I can look at the overall sentiment as people are completing it. Right. And so directionally, yes, if we saw in there like, that's interesting, we've gone from like high energy to low energy, or we've gone from everybody's really positive to people are feeling more negative, or, whatever. At an organizational level, that would be a directional indicator. And those are useful because we think of them as early warning detection systems. It's sort of the canary in the coal mine. I don't know exactly why, and I should go and look into this, but maybe there's something for me to go and pay some attention to here. Those are very useful, even if I don't get the specific answer out of the system.
Exactly.
What we do that's a bit more detailed is a quarterly happiness survey across everyone at Sensei. And it is, again, structured into those same Sensei values. And there are a few different questions. We try to keep it as short as we can, as we can, because obviously team members are busy, but it goes through for selfless or for empathetic or nimble. There's a few targeted questions in there around how much people can identify that value in their immediate team or in the company as a whole. And there's some quantitative and a little bit of qualitative as well, an opportunity for people to give us some feedback. There's a question in there around if there was one thing you could change in the organization, what would you change? So there's a few different things in there that help us to get some of that data. We push really hard on that to get to 100% completion, because it is one of the opportunities, not the only one at all, but certainly one of the opportunities for our team members to influence the direction we're going as a business. So we usually do get to 100% completion, even if we have to chase a couple people at the end to get them to fill it in, which is fine. And it is intentionally non-anonymous. They know that when they're going and answering it. We do have an anonymous feedback form that people can fill in, and it comes directly to me. And so if there was something that they just didn't feel comfortable putting their name on, there is a mechanism for them to do that. Fair. Generally, in our culture and the way that we have very intentionally designed it, people feel comfortable expressing themselves. And so we will get sometimes negative feedback in there. We will often get positive feedback. As an executive team, as a leadership team, we look at the trending data across those scores in terms of how happy people are feeling and where they're feeling it. We obviously dive into any issues that come up there. And sometimes we'll see a swing on a team or even on an individual. That's an opportunity to deep dive there and just check in and see what's happened and why that's going on. Quarterly is about the right cadence for that. More than that, and it just feels onerous for people. Less than that, and you're not paying attention to the rule of 5 degrees. And so you may end up doing an annual survey and discovering that sometime in the last 12 months, something's gone horribly wrong, but that's way too long to do anything about it. So so that's sort of the approach that we take on a regular cadence to doing that. And also to making sure that we are living up to the values that we've articulated to the team. When there's a particular topic that comes up where we want more team input, we might do something separate from that. And so a great example of that is around the return to work and hybrid spaces, obviously a topic of deep interest to probably everybody who's listening to this.
Yes.
And I think, so we had a bit of a unique opportunity in that when the pandemic hit, we were in Click's office space. So we just stopped going into the office. We didn't have an office for 2 years or whatever it was. And then we, as it seemed like emerging from the pandemic was going to become possible, we started to survey our team and check in. And our question was not, do you want to go back to the office? Our question was, why should we have an office? Because this wasn't a question of, do you want to go back to the way things were? Because there's no going back to the way things were. That is not
the
going
same.
to ever be a thing again.
I agree.
The question was, if we were going to have an office, why would we have one? What do we get out of it as value to us as an organization? It's something that we try to do as much as we can, which is to go back to first principles. So there shouldn't be just an assumption that we have to have an office or that the office has a particular layout. The question is, why do we have an office and what do we get? And so as an iterative process, we asked the whole team in a survey, and then we asked for volunteers who really wanted to spend time on this question. We got a very cross-sectional, cross-functional group of people together that we called the space team. And the space team had the chance to really weigh in on, what are we doing this for? What's the purpose? And what we got to out of it is an interesting conclusion. The conclusion was, first of all, 1 or 2 days a week at the outside. That is the most that people wanted to come in. We had maybe 3 people say 3 days a week, and like 1 person said 4 days a week, and nobody said 5. So it was clear to us that, first of all, in taking a new space, we could take way less space than we might have done pre-pandemic. The rule of thumb in the past has been somewhere around 100 square feet per person. And so at our size of 80, we should have taken at least 8,000 square feet and then probably planned for some growth and done about 10,000 square feet. We took 7,000 instead. And we think this 7,000 square feet is going to see us well through our Series B round as well in terms of office space. So that was one useful piece of information that allowed us to make a very meaningful financial decision about space that we might not have made otherwise. But what really came up in that was the thing that people wanted and missed was FaceTime and collaboration. Not FaceTime like more video technology, but like real face-to-face FaceTime. Right. So where we ended up, and this was due to the input of the team and a lot of collaboration, is a space designed entirely around collaboration. So there are no offices, there's no assigned seating. There are 3 large team collaboration rooms, and we publish a schedule out about 6 months in advance that rotates so that on any given day, there are 2 or 3 teams in the office. They get an assigned collaboration room for the day. And that day of the week changes for you week to week so that you're not always in with the same group of people. So if you were always in on Mondays, you would always see the same people on Mondays. This way, although it's a little bit harder from maybe a childcare perspective or some other considerations around schedule, but when you come in, there's a different group of people here. And that was really important to keep that kind of cross-team, cross-silo idea pollination and all of those things available. Also, what we're strongly hearing in this model, as opposed to the come in whenever, or you have an assigned day, come in on that day, is those people in that model, they end up showing up at work so that they can sit on video calls that they could have taken from home because they don't have the people there that they need in order to do something in person. By assigning it on a team basis, the day you come in, your team is here. And so you can spend time in a room with a whiteboard. You can do bigger picture strategic thinking. You can do some planning. You can do the stuff that doesn't really work as well virtually. You can certainly do mural whiteboards and stuff like that, but it's just not the same as being able to do it in person for our team who are geographically able to come in, obviously. For our team who are a bit further out, we try to bring them in once a month on those days. So they have a chance to be present with their team on about a monthly basis in person. And then some of our team members who are a little bit further out, they obviously can't. And so everything here is completely set up for virtual as much as it is in person. All of our meeting rooms are completely wired for that, and everyone's able to do that. And I would say it's been a huge success. And I would attribute that entirely to the input that came out of the team collaborating towards that solution and co-designing it together, rather than taking a kind of top-down, I want people in the office view of it.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. And it's not just with regards to remote working, it's with anything that you're deploying within your organization. It's early adoption, right? Which means early input. And I really enjoyed that you've kind of cracked your code as to what works for your team currently right now. And also being able to figure out the square footage per person. That's fantastic. But there's been a lot of interesting things that you've identified, Jay. Anywhere from all the way from recruitment to how we're coaching people versus performance versus making sure that we're honoring Sensei's culture and how that's deployed by way of an action-based model. And then also the 5 degrees. So how do you set up your emerging leaders or your management team for success to do the people side of your business?
Yeah, it depends whether they have come up in our organization or they've been hired in. Our preference is to promote from within whenever we can. It gives more growth opportunity to our team members. And so in most cases, I would say our leaders today were individual contributors at some point in the organization and have been promoted into those leadership roles. When we were thinking through this at Click, we really focused in on, as an organization, if we're going to provide training to people and mentorship, there are 2 inflection points in your career where you get an outsized return on the investment of that training. The first is when you go from being an individual contributor to a leader for the first time. And the second is when you go from being a leader to a leader of leaders for the first time. And in both of those inflection points in your career, a lot of things change for you individually. Where you spend your time and how you spend it and the expectations of you change. Also, the first inflection point, going from I am the steward of my career to I am the steward of other people's careers, changes. And then when you get to the transition from leader to leader of leaders, the big change is I need to step out from being in the business so I can be on the business.
Yeah.
Because now I'm not on the front line anymore. And I'm getting further away from the decision-making point. So if you even, and actually we did talk about this in Decoded, this I remember for sure was in the book. If you look at traditional top-down hierarchical command and control structures, if you trace them back to where we inherited them in the business world from, they come typically from either from the military, but then you see some really interesting things come up. So the very first modern org chart, if you think of an org chart in your head, we all have basically the same picture of, the boxes in a pyramid. The very first one actually came from American railroads. And the reason it's organized that way is it follows the branch line structure of the railroads from head office all the way out through the branch lines. So each branch station reported up the line to a branch manager and then up. So it followed the layout of the railroad to a large degree. And we still look at organizational structure the same way today. If you've actually never seen it, you should Google the image because it is a beautiful piece of design work, even though it was really just an internal org chart. Just look up first org chart railroad and you'll find it. But the reason I say that is because when you look at something like the military, which is known for having such a strict command and control hierarchy, they are actually moving away from that, moving more and more towards the realization that the best and fastest decision-making happens at the edge of the network, to use the term, which means that the people who are closest to the thing you have to make a decision about probably have the best data to make the decision. It doesn't mean that they have the authority to make it. That's a different consideration. But when you look at it from a business perspective, when you're an individual contributor, you are directly responsible for the work that you're doing. When you become a leader for the first time, you have to be responsible still often for your individual contribution to the team, but you also have to be responsible for their work. But when you become a leader of leaders, you are now no longer responsible for the output of individual contributors, except as much as they roll up to you. And so now you have a one-step removed ability to influence how the work gets done. You're also a step further away from a decision-making perspective. And the thing that's hard for a lot of people is to let go of that. It's to realize that their success is no longer measured by their individual contribution. It's now measured by the success of the people who roll up to them in that structure. So we put a lot of time and thought into how we could best equip people at those 2 inflection points. And so when people are coming up through the organization, it's actually a bit easier in a way because they were an individual contributor, and then very much within the culture and the approach, they become a leader, and then again, a leader of leaders. It's different when you bring people in from the outside and inject them at a point in that hierarchy, because they bring a lot of baggage from other organizations, from their own experiences.
Yeah.
I find, generally speaking, people have figured out how to be a manager or a leader by combining the best attributes of their best managers that they've had in the past and avoiding the worst attributes of their worst managers that they've had in the past. But the problem is, most people have only had bad managers. So what they have is lots of don't do this because it sucks. And what they don't have is lots of do this because it's great. And so when we're bringing people in, there is a period of time which we sort of jokingly, sort of not jokingly refer to as deprogramming, because it's almost like they have been in a cult of bad leadership and bad culture, and then they've joined us, and we have to show them that there is a different way of doing things, and they never quite believe us at the beginning, because most organizations' cultures are, I don't want to say that most cultures are toxic. I think that's probably an over-exaggeration. But in so many cultures, there are politics and things that are holding people back from their own achievement, but also disincentives from them doing some of the stuff that we hold most important in our culture, like experimentation. If you come from a place where it is not safe to fail, then you will never experiment because you have been taught that it is not safe to fail.
Innovation.
If you join a place that's right. So now we have to convince you that it's actually okay to fail and you're not going to get in trouble. And in fact, it's encouraged. And that takes a while for that deprogramming. It might be 6 months for some people before they have a bit of a sort of aha light bulb moment of, oh, wait, you were serious when you said that it was okay for me to actually try things that might not work. And so it changes, as I said, between people who came up through the organization, people who came in from the outside. And it's our responsibility, really, ultimately, as the leader of leaders, is to set everybody up for success in those different paths that they might be on.
Definitely, 100%. And Scott and Jay, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, 100%. And actually, if you're open to it, Jay, I'd like to bring you back to debate about training and development and leadership.
Absolutely.
I'm literally sitting on my hands right now for the past 5 minutes.
I know. I'm like, Ange, I got to cut you off here. We're at time. We got to wrap this up here. I know you got a ton of questions. Jay,
it would be my pleasure to come back anytime. I'm happy to keep chatting.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so wrapping things up here, Jay, last question we always like to ask our guests is, what are a few words of inspiration that you might want the world to hear?
I think right now, given the global environment, and as we all watch what's happening in Ukraine, I think that looking out for each other and standing together is the most powerful thing that we can do. And I hope that everybody out there feels the same way about it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Jay. And we really appreciate hearing your leadership insights on behalf of our subscribership. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And for those who would like to learn more about Sensei Labs, we're going to provide a link to the company's profile on the Elevate Business Podcast title page. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.